Hello, this is Claus Jensen presenting Exchange Sacrifice video number 8. This game was played in the National Correspondence Championships of Denmark 2010, and the game ended only a few days ago. I am currently Danish Correspondence Champion of 2009, so of course I wanted to try my best to defend my title. And my opponent in this game is the second highest ranked in the tournament. He's ranked 2408, so he was clearly one of the favorites for the title in 2010. And I was playing the white pieces, and we're heading for a Sicilian knight off e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, and with me playing the white pieces, I've played h3 numerous times. My experience is that black equalizes fairly easy, but it has been a good drawing weapon against stronger opponents. My opponent continued g6, g4, bishop g7, bishop g2, castles, bishop e3, knight c6, castles, bishop d7, knight d to e2, b5, f4, the normal plan in this h3 setup, b4, knight d5, knight takes d5, e takes d5, and knight a5. And black seems to be perfectly okay here. My b2 pawn is hanging, and the black pieces have good squares available. The bishop could go to b5, and the knight could be heading for c4. For example, if I played bishop d4 in this position, then bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, rook c8, rook a to c1, and then bishop b5, and also knight c4 was a possibility. And black's pieces are well placed. So I didn't play bishop d4 in this position, and I'm sure that if you watch my 7th video in this series on the exchange sacrifice, you will surely recognize this position and perhaps even remember that this very position occurred in a blitz game back in 2007. White was Magnus Carlsen and black was Ruslan Ponomarev. And Carlsen played the fantastic exchange sac b3 in this position. And that was indeed what I played in this game as well. And of course my opponent took the exchange. Bishop takes a1, queen takes a1, and then he played f5, preventing me from playing f5, which was in fact what Carlsen did in the blitz game against Ponomarev. And he's also threatening to win a pawn on g4. And I decided to sack this pawn because I found it very necessary to get my pieces to good squares as soon as possible. So knight d4, f takes g4, black grabs the pawn, h takes, bishop takes. And here I considered f5. Looks very promising, preparing knight e6. Queen c8 is the best defense for black. It's a good defensive move because it allows the queen to block the diagonal in many lines with queen c3. Another possibility could be to take the pawn, bishop takes f5, but then rook takes f5, g takes f5, and knight e6, winning the queen back because of the mate threat on g7. So that would be a poor option for black. But I never played f5. Instead, I played queen e1, which is of course eyeing the pawn on b4, but also giving me the option of playing my queen to the king side. Knight b7. With this move, black tries to get his knight back into play, and I decided to take the pawn on b4 because I can allow myself to spend time on this pawn grabbing, because black really struggles to put his pieces on good active squares. Queen d7, knight e6, and note here that he cannot take the knight on e6 because bishop takes e6, then d takes e6, and then the knight on b7 would be hanging. So instead he played rook f7. I played c4, knight c5, and with queen e1 I plan to transfer the queen to the king side. And again, black cannot take the knight. Knight takes e6, then d takes e6, and now it's the rook on a8 that's hanging. So he plays rook c8 instead, and now black threats to take my good knight on e6. So I have to go knight g5, rook f to f8, queen h4, and h5 is forced now because of the threat queen takes h7. And with bishop d4, my bishop finally occupies the long diagonal that is vacant after he gave up his bishop for my rook. a5, queen g3, rook b8. Black is clearly planning a4, so I played bishop a1 here, because now I can meet a4 with queen c3, which is threatening mate, and after rook f6 then can play b4 here. So instead my opponent played queen f5, and queen c3 with the mate threat came anyway, rook f6 and queen e3. Now I'm putting question to the e7 pawn, rook e8 followed, and now I could of course take back the exchange by playing bishop takes f6, but my bishop is more valuable than their rook, so instead I played bishop e4, queen d7, king h2, bishop f5, and at this point I wanted to keep my bishop, so bishop f3. And now black makes a few pointless bishop moves, but it's really difficult to find a useful plan for him. Bishop d3, rook f2, bishop b1, bishop c3, threatening to grab another pawn, and defending the pawn would allow my knight to back to e6, because if rook a8, then this knight e6, and then the knight cannot be taken because the rook is hanging on a8. We have seen that before. If rook c8 here, then taking the pawn, and then he can take on e6, but then I believe I'm clearly better here. So instead of defending the pawn, he played bishop f5. I took the pawn, and with all my queenside pawns, I think I'm practically sure of having at least a good endgame here. I'm probably already winning. Bishop g4, and having grabbed the pawn on a5, I can now accept the exchange of bishops, so I simply put the other bishop back on the diagonal with bishop c3. Exchange of bishops and e5, and after this move I can simplify further. F takes e5, rook takes, queen takes, d takes, and I believe this endgame is winning for white, especially after the very strong d6 here. My pawns cannot be stopped now, and of course here note that queen takes d6 would lead to a quick mate. So instead queen b7 came, and then I simply accepted the queen exchange by playing b4. Queen takes, knight has to move here to e4, and bishop takes e5, and my four queenside pawns are the decisive factor of this endgame. King f7, and now there's a little tactic available, d7, rook g8, bishop c7, and then when rook takes here, then the fork comes, king e8, knight takes, king takes, and bishop f4. And now I'm only up a pawn, but my bishop is much stronger than the knight because of its long range, which allows it to support my pawns in their advance on the queen side, and at the same time help stopping the black kingside pawns. g5 came, bishop e3, king c7, king g2, king b7, bishop d4, g4 and c5, and here my opponent resigned the game. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video number 8 in my series on the exchange sacrifice, and I hope to see you on my chess website at clausjensen.com. Bye bye for now.